Hello guys, and welcome back to another video. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'm going to be reviewing the new generation of Apple's MacBook Pros. I have specifically the M1 Max 14-inch model, but I'll be answering some questions that you might have in your mind, which is, should you go for the M1 Max or the M1 Pro, and which RAM size should you go, as well as I'll be talking about all the other stuff about this new MacBook Pro, talking about the display, the design, and everything else. So let's begin. Okay, so let's start off with my spec. So my spec has an M1 Max chip with 10 cores CPU and 32 cores GPU, 2 TB of SSD, and 64 GB of unified memory. Quite a heavy spec, and I'll talk about which one should you go for when I'll compare the M1 Pro and the M1 Max. But I picked up the 14-inch model instead of the 16-inch because I like the portability of the 14-inch, and Apple has right now increased the size of the 13-inch to the 14-inch by an inch to match the 16-inch. Now, I picked this spot of my local app store. I got quite lucky that they had an M1 Max in stock because the wait times are now crazy for the new MacBook Pros. If you order an M1 Pro with 1 TB of SSD and 16 GB of unified memory, you'll be waiting until July. And people have been waiting their orders for MacBook Pros for like now 3 months. People even who ordered back from February have to still wait for their order. And my advice is, if you are in the market for the new MacBook Pro and you can't wait, make sure to check with your local Apple store. They might have the model you're looking for in stock. That's why I got lucky, and I don't have to wait now for the delivery because the delivery times are crazy. Also, a new interesting thing about the new MacBook Pros is you can get the same specs for both sizes. You're not compromised now between performance and portability. Both sizes get the same specs, which is lovely. Really makes it suitable for those people who really want a bigger screen size or portability. Let's now talk about the design of the new MacBook Pros. So the design is quite a big change. Apple changed the design by a lot by making it bigger in every way, also adding some interesting design choices, like the new notch, which I'll talk about later in this video. Apple also blacked out the keyboard panel, which is nice. I love it, especially with silver. It just gives a nice contrast. The MacBook Pros are now thicker. Well, technically they do look thicker, but they're not actually that thicker than the previous models. That's to accommodate the new I/O, which I'll also talk about later in this video. They raised the feet of the MacBook Pros for better cooling, which is nice. The bezels are now slimmer. However, you might not see that because most of the stuff I do on my MacBook Pro requires to trim down the bezels because the actual screen estate of the MacBook Pro is not optimized for like some applications on software. And the MacBook Pro transcript that has been on the lid on the previous generation has now been moved to the bottom of the MacBook Pros, like a throwback to the regular MacBook Pros that also had it on the bottom. Let's now talk about the display. Apple has a mini LED display brought from the Pro Display XDR and the 12.9-inch iPad Pro. However, unlike the Pro Display XDR, the MacBook Pro has 120Hz ProMotion, which is nice. The rest is the same, so it has a 1:1 contrast ratio, 1000 nits of brightness. However, Apple limited to 500 nits of brightness for some reason, and that is apparently if you have extra dynamic range. For standard dynamic range, you have 500 nits. It has 1600 nits for HDR content. For mini LED, you get 10,000 mini LED panels, so you get deep blacks and great colors, and you have 1 billion colors produced by the display. So yeah, the new mini LED display we've seen on the iPad Pro, on the Pro Display XDR, it's amazing. Love the new display. Oh, of course, one of the issues of the display with the new mini LED technology is blooming. But to be honest, I don't really notice it that often, and I don't really find it a big issue. But it's something you want to know. Let's now talk about the speakers, because Apple's speakers on their laptops are always amazing, and it's no exception with the new MacBook Pros. They have an amazing 6-speaker sound system with spatial audio, which means when you're watching movies, you get this nice 3D sound stage. And for some movies, you might support Dolby Atmos surround, I think with Apple TV Plus especially. And to simply put it to the truth, These speakers are amazing. They're loud, they're clear, they're bassy. Yeah, love the new speakers. Let's now talk about the webcam and microphone. So for the first time in a while, Apple upgraded the webcam to a 1080p webcam. Finally, something for some people have been waiting for a while now. And Apple still has their free studio mics, which you can take a listen and check out the webcam quality now. Alright, so right now what you're hearing is the MacBook Pro microphone, and you're seeing the webcam of the MacBook Pro 14-inch 2021. Let me know in the comments how's the webcam quality and the microphone quality. To me it seems pretty good. The 1080 webcam is definitely less pixelated and in nice lighting conditions. Seems a very good webcam. Let's talk about the notch. So some people have criticized the notch on looking weird or just don't like it in general. Personally, I don't mind the notch because it doesn't really interfere with my workflow, and I don't see it that often because, well, the wallpaper that I use doesn't really hide the notch quite well. But yeah, the notch obviously has to be there to accommodate a webcam, otherwise we wouldn't have a webcam. And for the most things I do, like, the notch just gets out of the way, so I don't really have issues with it. I know some people might not like the look, but I'm kind of used to them on the iPhones. I don't really mind it on the MacBooks. Let's talk one of the biggest upgrades for the new generation of MacBook Pros, and probably the best, the return of the I/O, the return of the ports. So we get free USB-C/Thunderbolt 4 ports, which have, for the M1 Pro model, has support up to two 6K external displays with 60 Hz of ProMotion. For the M1 Max models, that's free external 6K monitor with 60 Hz, which is crazy. We get an SDXC card slot, not the fastest, not the most modern out there, but at least it's there. We get HDMI 2.0, again, not the best and the fastest out there, but at least it's there. We get MagSafe free. The return of the MagSafe is back. However, fun fact, if you don't like using MagSafe, you can still charge your MacBook Pro with USB-C ports from your maybe old MacBook Pro charger. And we get high impedance headphone jacks, which is great for audiophiles. Headphone jack has now support for high impedance headphones. It's amazing to have the ports back, and obviously the disadvantage is the MacBook Pros are now thicker. Personally, I like the new design and I don't mind the return of the ports. So yeah, huge thumbs up for Apple for returning the ports. And finally, the dongle life is over. Let's now talk about the keyboard briefly. So it's still the same awesome Magic Keyboard with the 1mm key travel. The keys are reliable. I like the feeling. I like the key travel. Yeah, the Magic Keyboard is an amazing keyboard. We've seen it now since the 2020 MacBook Pros, and this one, well, nothing has changed about it. The only thing that has changed is the touch bar is gone. So now we finally get our old row of function keys back. To me, I kind of like the touch bar. It did have some nice shortcuts like inputting emojis, but it's not a big deal. I can live without the touch bar. Also, Apple has now, for the new generation of MacBook Pros, made the row of function keys bigger than they used to be, just like we get on the wireless Magic Keyboard. Let's now talk about portability. So this could be a big question for some of us people. How portable are the new MacBook Pros? Well, let me tell you this straight. If you want portability, get the 14-inch model because it is going to be way more portable than 16-inch. The 16-inch has been criticized as being very unportable and very big and bulky. So if you want portability, do go for this 14-inch model. It's lighter and smaller and more portable. I carry the 14-inch in my backpack, and in terms of weight difference compared to the 13-inch MacBook Pros previous generations to this new 14-inch, it's quite a small difference in terms of weights, and I can happily carry it around in my backpack with no fatigue on my back. So yeah, portability. If you want portability, do go for the 14-inch model because the 16-inch is quite big and belt heavy. Let's talk about battery life, and this is one of the biggest upgrades, obviously, with Apple's new silicon chips. Is the battery life has been amazing. When I do normal web browsing, typing up documents, writing emails, watching YouTube videos, the battery will easily last me all day, easily, which is really amazing. Apple claims like 17 hours of web browsing, 1 hours of video playback and 11 hours of Apple TV Plus streaming, something like that. But all I can say is the battery has been amazing, especially when it's under load. My Intel MacBook Pro 13-inch of 2020 would chew like 10 to 20% when editing a 4K 15-minute video on better quality. The new MacBook Pros eats like 5 to 7%, maybe even 10, editing a full 4K 15-minute video and rendering and exporting, which is crazy that the new MacBook Pros are so battery efficient. However, if battery life matters to you, this is where you might want to consider yourself an M1 Pro instead of the M1 Max, because the M1 Pro will be more efficient. It has less GPU cores to feed, because a lot of people did testing and the M1 Pro came out to be better in terms of battery life. So that is something to consider if battery life is an issue for you. Let me now quickly talk about RAM size, which one should you go for. So if you're in the market for the M1 Pro, your choice is between 16 or 32 gigs. Obviously 32 gigs would be my choice, and it's the sweet spot for most people. However, if you're going for the M1 Max model, should you go for 64 gigs or save a couple of cash and just leave it at 32? And my answer is, do not buy 64 gigabytes of unified memory. It is too overkill. Like, the only people that might need 64 gigs is that do a lot of heavy graphic work. But most people, even for me, for my workflow, 32 gigabytes will be enough. If you edit 8K video, then yeah, maybe you can consider yourself 64 gigs. But otherwise, I'll just tell you simply, save yourself some cash and get 32 gigabytes of unified memory. It is more than enough for most people. Let's now talk about performance. So I'm not going to bore you with all the benchmarks and stuff. I'm just going to tell you how it is for my workflow. It is one of the biggest also upgrades for the new generation of MacBook Pros. The Apple Silicon chips are insane, and the M1 Max is just glorious. So before, I used to have a 13-inch MacBook Pro 2020 with quad-core Core i5 and integrated GPU. And I shoot Sony a7S III 10-bit 422 codec footage, which I do on Final Cut Pro on better quality. My MacBook Pro will struggle. However, the new M1 Max 14 just crushes it with almost no delays at all during playback, hitting the spacebar, and the scrolling is so smooth on the timeline. And I can color grade and out a couple of graphics like text or animations, and the MacBook Pro just handles it absolutely like it's a piece of cake. And that is all, with the fans being 95% off, which is just a pleasure to use. The only time when the fans come on is during rendering. And as loud as I could get, the loudest I could get them was 60 decibels. And that's me like sitting 2 meters away from my MacBook Pro. Interesting thing I've noticed, the fans in here do seem to be louder than my 13-inch Intel MacBook Pro, but at least they do come on rarely. And the export and render times, they're just absolutely insane. So a 15-minute 4K video, the MacBook Pro would render in like 1 minute. In 1 minute, it would be done. My 13-inch Intel would do it in like 5 minutes. And export times are crazy as well. My MacBook Pro 14-inch would export a video in like 2 to 3 minutes, whereas my Intel 13-inch MacBook Pro would take like 10 minutes or so. Absolutely amazing performance. Double thumbs up for Apple, for the Apple Silicon chips, because they're just amazing. All of this helps to speed up my workflow, and yeah, love it. Love the new chips. Now I'm gonna be answering which chip should you go for, the M1 Pro or the M1 Max, since a lot of people have questions as well. Which one should they go for? Really, for most people, it's their own personal preference, because there is a lot of factors you can consider. One of them is, are you gonna be using the laptop for a long time? And the second factor is your workflow. So if you're that person who keeps their laptop for 2 to 3 years and then upgrade to the next one, save yourself a couple of cash and just get the M1 Pro. Most likely the M1 Pro that you'll use for the 2-3 years will do you the job, and it will do everything you need with its performance. However, if you're that type of person who keeps their laptop for like a long time, from 5 years and onwards, consider yourself an M1 Max, because it's better for longevity. I know that the workflow I do right now, editing 4K footage, photo editing, graphic animation stuff. I know my MacBook Pro still has like about 50 to 40% of performance reserved. I know that my MacBook Pro can handle way more than my workflow. And I like knowing that, because if I upgrade with my workflows, let's say I will start editing 6K footage, 8K footage, I know that my MacBook Pro has performance reserved and it can handle it, because I will planning using this laptop for like 5 years and plus. So it made sense for me to go for the M1 Max model. But if you are the person who does heavy graphic work and 8K videos, do go for the M1 Max. The M1 Pro might not handle 8K video editing, because the M1 Max is really tailored towards the people who do a lot of GPU work. Work that relies a lot on the GPU, like doing 3D, blendering and stuff, editing videos. The M1 Max is tailored for those people. However, if you're that person who does coding, photo editing, go for the M1 Pro. You do not need the M1 Max if that's your workflow, because the M1 Pro will easily handle those tasks. Plus, with the benefits, it will be quieter and more battery efficient. Hopefully this made sense. So the people that need to go for the M1 Max is if you do have a lot of graphic work, like editing 8K video, and if you're planning to use your MacBook Pro for a long time. Otherwise, everybody else should go for the M1 Pro 10 core, 16 core GPU model. I think that's really the sweet spot for most people, since not a lot of people will edit 8K video. Most of us edit like 4K video nowadays, and the M1 Pro can easily handle 4K video editing. So yeah, hopefully I managed to answer your question for which chips you should go for. Now I'm gonna give you my conclusion on the new MacBook Pro. So I'm a huge fan of the new MacBook Pros. I love them in every single way. The design, the performance, the fact that the ports are back. Apple gave us back everything. They returned everything we wanted. They listened to their customers. They knew that the 2016 to 2020 touch bar models were a failure, essentially, not the best. And now the new MacBook Pros are literally the best MacBook laptops Apple made to date. The best. So if you're in the market for the new MacBook Pro, I would say, yeah, buy them. This is the best laptop probably ever made this year. Literally. I love it. So yeah, I do really recommend, if you're in the market for the new MacBook Pros, get one. Absolutely do. I think it will impress you how much performance it carries. And thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you again in the next video.